Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having Greek yogurt, almond butter, frozen blueberries. All right, today we're going to talk about how often we can or should rotate accessory movements. Something that I've had a lot of people ask. They'll always say that, Jason, how often do you change them? And I'm going to say there's 3 general rules you can use to determine when we rotate accessory movements. And by accessory movements, what do I mean? For our purposes, because again, I promote conjugate type training, I mean, the same thing could apply to 531, something like that, where you have primary lifts and then everything else is for hypertrophy. So in this case, anything that we're not doing for max effort or for dynamic effort, we're going to count as an accessory, even if you're doing pause benching. So, how often? I like to use for a lot of my clients 3-week blocks. And it's not to say that's the only approach. This is if you want a structured approach. If you want a structured approach. You may not have enough equipment with your training volumes to do this all the time, though, this way. So 3-week blocks work well for a number of reasons. Number one, we're usually going to be rotating our dynamic effort work in 3-week waves. Right? We're usually going to be doing that at minimum. At minimum, we're going to be changing from sumo to conventional or something like that, or from bands to change, or be changing barbells every 3 weeks. So since we're going to do 3-week waves there already, and a lot of the 3-week mesocycles that they came up with and a lot of early periodization was based upon the fact that the human body adapts to certain things like every 21 days. And it's like you'll hear Louis Simmons say, if you max on the same lift 3 weeks in a row, you will stagnate and regress. Okay, so the idea of using 3-week waves, it gives you 3 weeks, you try to progress on that, and then you switch it to something else. Okay, done in 3-week waves. Now, it's not the only way to do it. I would say the other options we have to work with are you could do an accessory movement until you start to see signs of overuse. And I have clients who this is a common problem with. Not so much guys at a heavier body weight. I find that a lot of lifters who started out kind of skinny, basically your hard gainers, as you bulk them up, they tend to have a lot weaker tendons. They have tendons that are more prone to inflammation, things like that, than guys who have been at a heavier body weight longer periods of their life. And it makes sense, carrying around body weight thickens up connective tissue. So what I find with a lot of those guys, certain parts of their body start hurting. Those guys, sometimes if we do too much overhand rowing and overhand pulling, like with a pronated grip, their hands and things start to hurt. They start getting inflammation in their hands. Yeah, and that actually happens, and I get that. And in their forearms, things like their brachioradialis. These things start to hurt. They start to get inflamed. But a lot of times their hand and all the tendons of the hand. Particularly if we've been doing much max deadlifting. So in that case, I have to rotate them to supine grip. Right? I have to take them over to that. Or their elbows. Elbows start to get really, really inflamed. Well, we rotate it. Their quad tendons, their adductor tendons. All right, so if you're starting to get inflammation in a tendon, that's a sign of overuse. And if you start to get any sign of overuse, it's time to rotate a movement. The thing to remember, though, with a rotating movements like that, certain exercises are more prone to it than others, and I'll give you some examples. Dumbbells, for example, are less prone to overuse. Why? Because they have a natural variant in the movement pattern. The instability of it means that you're going to rotate in and out and stuff as it gets more difficult. You're not as much in a fixed bar path. Not in such a fixed bar path. So what happens as a result of that, overuse takes a lot longer to accrue. It's one of the perks of dumbbells. Whereas in an illegal wide bench, sometimes by the end of the second week. Like if you're doing it twice a week, let's say you're doing it on max effort and dynamic effort day both. Sometimes by workout 4, some of your lifters start to get that inflammation through here. And a lot of people say, oh, it's shoulder. No, it's not shoulder. It's actually oftentimes your pec tendons themselves, which again inserts into shoulder and feels like shoulder. And sometimes at most we can push that lift for 3 weeks and then we have to rotate it. Okay, so that's a common one. Same thing, we could look at triceps. If you're doing dumbbell extensions, either a rolling extension or a stretch reflex one, it tends to not really accumulate fatigue in the elbows. But if you're doing a skull crusher to your face with a bar, or you're doing a JM press, again, tendons start to get inflamed quicker. It means you've got to take the skull crusher out. And skull crushers, you can't even usually push 3 weeks. Usually 2 weeks, and that's about it. Right? 4 workouts, your elbows can't take much more unless you have really strong elbow tendons. They start to get inflamed. Very, very common. Same thing with the JM press, and then if that happens, we need to go to something like reverse bands on it so that it unloads it at the bottom. It's a variation you need to go to. All right, another option is to just, every time you take a new accessory in, you start a hair light, where you have a couple reps in reserve. Right, do 10s with a weight you can do 12 with, and then you add weight. You micro load it up. It could even be tiny little jumps. You can use micro plates. You can use even smaller fractional plates. You can get plates that take you up 1 pound at a time. You add weight on that lift, and when it stalls, you rotate it out. So you could look at it as long as you can progress on that exercise, we're getting progressive overload, then you keep it in the rotation. It's also a very, very viable way to do accessories. Now, that method's not going to work on exercises that you have to rotate out often due to overuse, but that combination works well together. On the other hand, if you have an accessory that you feel is really, really critical, you're probably going to need to keep it in. All right, you're probably going to need to keep it in even if it's stalling. Like let's say you decide that you really need dumbbell presses. Well, you could keep it in, or your other option would be you could rotate a variation of it. You could take it to a slight decline or a slight incline. Now, if you got an adjustable bench like mine, I don't have to take it to steep ones. You could take it over 1 notch if it stalls, and then try to progress on it, and then again adjust it again when it stalls. Those are options. But the thing is, you need to track all this stuff. So if you're going to look at any of these, especially from a progression perspective, you do need to keep logs. You need to keep records so that you know that you're progressing. And when you rotate that lift back in, you can try to get to where you were before and then surpass it before you rotate it out again. So these are really kind of your options for it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.